ICQ Podcast episode 348. Kit building tips with Joe Eisenberg K0 November Echo Bravo. Well, hello fellow amateur and radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this our 348th episode of the ICQ Amateur and Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Dave Goodwin, Ft8 Charlie Bravo, Sebastian Soika, Oscar Zulu 2, India Romeo Oscar, and of course our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Chris Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Ed DD5 Lima Papa, and Bill Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is an interview with Joe Eisenberg Kilo 0 November Echo Bravo, and here we're talking to Martin about kit building tips. Well, as always, it's your very kind donations that keep the ICQ podcast advert free and helps us pay our way on the internet, etc. And we'd like to thank the following listeners who have found value in the show and have kindly sent across some money our way. First is Dave Goodwin, Ft8 Charlie Bravo. And he says, apologies it took so long to offer you some support. Your podcasts have provided me with a lot of entertainment and information. I look forward to each release and usually listen while walking the dog. Along with his call sign of Ft8 Charlie Bravo, he holds several others, including the UK call sign Mike 0 Tango Tango Juliet. He enjoys the roundtable discussions with the guys and obviously the other amateur radio topics that we do. He does sometimes find some of the thoughts interesting, engaging, which can result in outbursts that can confuse his dog. Hi. So, David, we try and trick off thoughts and debates for you, and say it's great to know you're enjoying the work the guys are doing. So, thank you very much for your support, Dave. Really do appreciate it. And of course, we'd like to thank Sebastian as well. Oscar Zulu 2, India Romeo Oscar as well for his donation. No message from him, but I'm sure if there's one, it will come along to us soon. You can do what the guys have done, and along with our monthly and subscription donors, by finding the value you find in the show, turn it into a monetary sum, and visiting icqpodcast.com/donate. Well, as I say, everything you send our way keeps us advert free and allows us to continue to keep on, producing the show for you. Right now, we're going to join Martin, Chris, Ed, and Bill to discuss the news and generate thoughts about, the news that's been going on in the hobby in this last fortnight, including question poll committee seeks updates to the technician question poll, and HEMA comes to southern Germany. As always, so for you to enjoy.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode's ICQ Podcast News Roundtable. Tonight, it's the News Roundtable for episode 348. And seems a lot of episodes, 348, but we're here. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Good evening, Martin. Good evening, guys.
Yeah, good to have you, Chris. Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, may or may not join us in the next few minutes. He's having technical difficulties, but if he joins us, it'll be great to have him on board. Moving over to Germany, we have Mr. Ed Durrant, TD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, hi, Martin. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, it's good to have you, Ed. And moving to the other side of the pond, Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Martin. Hi, everybody.
And Mr. Frank
I was going to say, we skipped Frank because he's on special assignment. Super secret.
Yeah. You're saying he's part of the CIA, are you?
I will not confirm or deny if he's an intelligence asset. And you can rip that phrase apart any way you want.
All right. Okay. I was being naughty. Right. Let's look at the news stories for this episode. The NCVEC question pool committee is seeking input for and updates to questions for the question pool. I think this is, we can all think of questions, but to get questions that are unambiguous in the pool, it's got to be a special task. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, over here in the States, we have the National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators, and they have a subcommittee called the Question Pool Committee, and they actually are requesting input to the community, looking for new questions or modified existing questions to the technician license pool, which will go in effect next year, July 1st. The idea being is that some folks in the past have complained about questions. So this is your chance to fix questions or propose different ones. Likewise, they want you to suggest new questions in case there are certain topics that a technician license here in the States should be, basically have to know to get a license. So they're basically what I consider crowdsourcing new potential questions, which I really thought is they do this every few years, but I'm glad they're continuing to do this, and I'm glad they're soliciting input again, because it's only going to make the exams better, especially as they go through and fix questions that people had concerns about.
Yeah, and the other thing is our hobby keeps changing. New things keep getting added. I know the RSGB, when I spoke to them a couple of weeks ago, are changing their syllabus to reflect modern technology. So it's got to be a good thing. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I know over here the RSGB do a similar thing with the questions for the UK, the three different exams here in the UK, and it's all volunteers that are writing those questions. However, I do think it's a lot harder than it first looks. Writing a good question with the four answers because it looks like, well, we know the States is similar to the UK in terms of you've got a multiple choice exam. It's actually quite hard to write a question because it's got to meet a certain criteria. It's looking to examine something specific in the syllabus. And it's also not got to help the candidate answer another question. And that's the difficult bit. So we were chatting before we started to record tonight that, sometimes I've taken exams, certainly in the IT world, where you're not quite sure the answer to a question. So you maybe have a good guess on it. And then later on, you'll see another question that answers the question we were stuck on, and you go back and fix it. So it's actually quite difficult to write questions that kind of don't help, don't give the game away, shall we say, for other questions perhaps that are in the exam. So, it is something that's, I guess, a certain skill. So, I do know the RSGB will, from time to time, ask people to help write questions, and they'll say, we could do with some more questions about this particular syllabus point or these particular aspects of the exam. So, they have to categorize questions. They have to, or certainly in the UK, they have to answer it. They have to relate to a specific part of the syllabus, so that when you get an exam, the exam's got a good spread of questions on different topics and not all on the same subject. So it's, it looks like the US have got a very similar approach, and it's good that they're, like you say, adding more questions as time goes by. I know that in the States the questions are published, and so I'm guessing it looks like here they're going for the next round of questions. I think they're talking about the 2022 to 2026 pool of questions. So it's a good one.
Yeah, well, you and I have taught various courses together, and we've written sort of questions, and I'm probably guilty of writing some very ambiguous questions at odd times. But when you're sitting with a student and you can discuss them, sometimes the ambiguous question, if you're an instructor, is great because you generate a discussion point and people discuss it through. But you can't have an ambiguous question when it's in the exam.
Absolutely right. And when I did the last course, I had some great fun the night before our revision day, actually writing I went through the syllabus and wrote a whole bunch of questions to a lot of them I wrote deliberately to trick them, and I would hope that the real questions don't do this, to make them think. So I'd try to steer them down to one, thinking the question related to one thing, maybe put some numbers in there to think it was a calculation question, and actually it was a safety question, that sort of thing, where actually the answer was you don't use it at all because you've got a trailing cable or something like that. So yeah, it can be quite fun writing questions, but writing the real questions, that's got to be done very carefully and got to be really thought out, and you've got to be careful that the question isn't ambiguous, because I've certainly, maybe not in the amateur radio world, but certainly in the past I've taken exams where some questions it's really difficult to figure out quite what the person writing the question was trying to get at, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, certainly do. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think, as you all said, it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. But it's good that they're getting questions from outside. The danger is you need somebody to verify the question after it's been set before it goes into the examination store, database, whatever you want to call it. And if you get somebody looking at it from a different angle that's not actually a member of the NCVEC, and then the NCVEC basically check it and validate it that it's correct and that it's not ambiguous and everything else, you're going to get a better quality than perhaps some of the people that have been doing it for years and they're looking at it in a more narrow approach somehow. So I think getting external input to the question pool is actually a very good idea, and I wouldn't like the job of having to verify the questions to decide whether to accept or deny them, because if it could make the difference between somebody passing the exam and not and failing the exam because of a question you've written because it was ambiguous and somebody didn't catch that, that's a bad situation.
Yeah, but the problem is harder these days than when you and I did ours, Ed, because in fairness, they do their exam, they're marked. There's a different exam paper in the UK every time. They do their exam, it's marked initially by the instructor or the examiner in the hall, which gives them an indicative mark that they should or should not have done passed. And then it goes off and it's computer marked on the sheet. But in our day, Ed, and I spent a lot of time talking to people on this, we had like maybe 90, I think mine was 90 questions when I did mine in one go. And they got marked like a month, 6 weeks, over a month, 6 weeks period. And what I was told was that originally they take, say, an exam question paper and they go through it, and they take a sample 100 question papers for argument's sake, and they go through it. And if everybody in that first 100 got question 3 wrong, they'd look at it and go, well, that's ambiguous. You can't have everybody get that one wrong. Therefore, that question's a bad question. And then they would take it out. And instead of you having an exam paper of 90 questions, you probably have an exam paper of 89 because they remove that question from everybody. So, we're our own worst enemy because we want things done quickly. But equally, in the old days, there was a bit more leeway to work out if you could or could not answer the question.
Yeah, a question for Bill here. If these questions are set by the NCVEC, does the FCC also have to validate them?
No.
So they're trusted effectively.
Yeah, it's basically outsourced to take care of by them.
Right, moving on to our next news story. HEMA has come to South Germany. Ed, this is one of yours. I know you did a presentation at the QSO Expo about this, but tell us more and what the significance is.
Okay, I think most people listening to this podcast will have heard of my exploits in SOTA. SOTA Summits on the Air is a scheme that's been around since 2002. And generally, it's for the higher mountains and the mountains that have a prominence, so a height above all other land around it of 150 meters. HEMA is a newer, it came in, I should have it, the note here, but I haven't got it. But I think about 6 or 7 years ago. And this one is for summits that have between 100 meter prominence and 150 meters. So a little less prominence, a little less, often a little less difficult to get to summits, and is more a scheme towards working unique summits between operators, working what we call hump to hump, so equivalent of summit to summit. And also there are awards for the first contacts into different DXCC entities, etc. So again, HEMA started like SOTA did in the UK and is starting to expand into other parts of the world. There's an active group in Spain, and there's a couple of active groups in Australia. And now we're getting started also into South Germany, into Bavaria. And I'm actually the coordinator for the South Germany area. Did all the surveying of the summits on various online maps. And on April the 5th, we launched. That was the Easter Monday. Coincided with snow, high winds, rain, etc. And also coincided with my portable transceiver breaking down a few days earlier, which we'll cover in the What Did You Do During the Last 4 Weeks section later on. But the scheme is running. There are 41 summits in it at the moment. We may add some more later, but there's 41 to start with. And it's just another scheme where the aim is to get people out portable, using portable equipment, enjoying the countryside, and not as stressful as SOTA, but a little bit harder than the Global Mountain Award scheme in many cases. So a nice one in the middle. So if people listening to this thought, oh, SOTA's too hard, take a look at HEMA, hema.org.uk is the website, and it might be a nice thing to take part in, to get the awards, and just generally to be able to get out and do some portable operating and get some nice wallpaper for doing it. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting, Ed. And just as a side, this is really off the wall. Easter Monday, I was working at the railway station, and the particular railway station I was working at is in the middle of nowhere. And a couple turned up, and one of the gentlemen was buying a ticket to go into London on his travel back to Germany. And I said to him, I said, I spoke to you, Ed, and you told me the weather wasn't too good in Germany. And he went, oh, that's understandable. But it was quite nice to be out. I mean, it was so off the wall. You know, this station is in the wilds of nowhere. And there's a gentleman going back to Germany, and I'd happened to speak to you on the Sunday. So it was a nice for him. But
Yeah.
there you go. But Bill, you do SOTA Summit, so you going to have a go at this as well if they do it in the States?
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at it for sure. I was going to ask Ed if they had a spotting page, but I already found it. So,
yeah, you've got basically similar tools to what you have in SOTA. So you have your spotting, your alerting, your rules, but it's a much smaller setup at the moment. It's only just growing, only just starting, and there's no HEMA in the US as yet. But
Nope.
so there's also information on there of how you contact the people behind this, which is about 2 people in the UK, 3 people. If you want to set up something in your area of the US or wherever.
I think it's neat that there's actually summits in the Falkland Islands for this, but not over here yet.
Well, I was surprised at that, actually. I was just looking at the website, and there's a lot of summits in the Falkland Islands. It's been like 77, is it? I was still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, 77. So that's a lot. I didn't realise the Falkland Islands were actually that hilly. So
hilly.
there you go.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, it's, I'm looking at West Falklands right now, 153, 137, 227, 16. It's just like around here. Pretty impressive.
So it sounds good. Chris, are you going to get involved in, because I know you do summits on here?
Not a huge amount, no one near Ed's level, but I've done a few summits over the years, and it looks like fun. I've noticed Devil's Dyke is on there, and that's literally, you get out of the car and you're there. The trig point is right next to the car park, so this probably isn't quite as physically taxing as doing, hiking up a big hill somewhere. So yeah, it looks like it could be fun. It looks like it's already popular. I mean, looking at that particular site, Devil's Dyke, it's already had 6 activations. So it's obviously going to be popular. So that's that's really good. I was going to say, I noticed we've got a certain Ed Durrant is the Southern Bavaria manager for this?
Yeah.
Coordinator, yeah.
But I was going to say the majority of the activity so far has been in the UK. They're only just starting to move out. I said there's a quite an active group in Spain. There's obviously one or two people in the Falklands if they've actually gone to the extent of surveying those summits and getting them mapped and everything else. So be interesting to get the first contact from Germany down to the Falklands, from a summit to a summit, or a hump to a hump, as we like to call them.
Yeah. Well, Chris, the better weather's coming, and we haven't been out playing for a long time.
I've got my new radio as well, so absolutely, yeah.
So this could be a good one. You listen out, you might hear at least, you might hear quite a few ICQ presenters on this, so could be worth a listen. Okay, moving on to our next news story. Cyprus radio hams have removed discriminatory language from their documentation. Now, we're talking about the Greek side of Cyprus. We had a bit of a discussion before we started, but this is to do with the Greek side. And this is the Cyprus Amateur Radio Society, or CARS, and they're making things gender neutral, which I think has got to be a good thing. Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, to me, the obvious thing to say is, well, how many countries do we have where there are radio societies with documentation that is not gender neutral? I would hope this is a normal thing. Perhaps not, in which case, good for the guys in Cyprus, and let's all do the same, because there's no reason. Well, the hobby suffers from the fact that everything's very male, and if your documentation is very much angled that way as well, then you're not going to attract females. And to me, it's something in this day and age we shouldn't have non-gender neutral documentation around. It's not inviting to non-males.
It's quite interesting, actually. I found in my loft an old newspaper, and it's quite subtle, actually, but you do notice it. So there's an advert in there, and it said this is only from the sort of 1980s as well, so it wasn't that long ago. Advert for the managing director of some company, and it said something like the man must have. It was all very clearly he must have this, and it was very clearly going to be a man that got the job. There was nowhere in that advert would it say anything about, it was almost like saying if you're female, there's absolutely no point applying. And so, even though it's quite subtle, it is actually, it's actually quite a powerful thing. I remember a funny story many years ago. I used to work for a large retailer, Saturday job type scenario when I was a teenager, and I was working on the photo counter, and there was a manual in there for people because they actually had like a 1 hour photo lab, and there was a manual in there for staff to use. I wasn't. It was a different company who did the actual developing of films, but it said in there, everything in there referred to he must do this, and this sort of thing. And at the end, it just had a little thing at me added in the end just to say, oh, and for political correctness, if you see the word he, it could also refer to her, which I thought was just a very poor attempt at trying to make it gender neutral. So there you go.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. There is some very badly written documentation around. And, we're in the 21st century now. And in fairness, everybody who joins our hobby brings something to the table. Male, female, whatever race, religion, creed, I don't care. You bring something to the table. If you're interested in radio, we should still listen, because there's a fairly good chance that people would have thought of things that us old fogies like me haven't thought about. So
there was something, sorry Martin to talk over, there was something actually mentioned on and unfortunately I know we can't use this as part of the podcast because there's a problem with the recording, but when we did the QSO Today event and there was a round table at rebranding amateur radio, I remember during that was that talk talking about how to make the hobby more inclusive, and I think it was Pete from Essex Ham said about there's no point us trying to guess what people want to do. Actually, you get involved and ask them. It's really for them to become part of the hobby and for them to grow it themselves, and us not to try to second guess and figure out what somebody else another group might want. So the only way you're going to get more ladies into the hobby will be to actually get them into the hobby and actually get them to figure out for themselves what they want to do, and us try not to do it for them, so to speak. So I thought that was quite an interesting conversation. Unfortunately, I know the recording didn't work very well for use on the podcast, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll give Pete 10 out of 10 for that one, in fairness. And yeah, I mean, I think what I was trying to get across is, yeah, everybody's an individual. Treat them as an individual. And if we're big enough to listen to everybody, and it could be a 10-year-old that suddenly says, I don't understand this because, just because we understand it doesn't necessarily mean that other people will understand it. So getting a better understanding and how people use things and all those sort of things are very important, I would suggest, regardless. Bill, we've gone long on this one. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to be brief, but I agree with the idea of making your language of your documents gender neutral to try to be inclusive as possible. And just like you guys said, actually you're telling the story there of Pete's, I think you said Pete was suggesting it. That is absolutely true. Get folks in, let them figure out what the best thing that they can do. And when they get excited about amateur radio, they're going to bring their friends in, who's going to bring their friends in, and this is all going to get much better.
Yeah, and if they get excited about something, Bill, and they show me, I'm probably going to get excited about it as well. So it's a win-win situation, in my opinion. Right, move to our next news story, and I'm going to get you to do this one first, Bill, so get ready.
Oh, lucky me.
Yeah, this rather surprised me at first. Then I thought, well, why should it surprise me? Radio interference from USB 3. Turns out USB 3 devices literally have broadband interference ranging almost from DC up to 5 gigahertz. What's your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, this was something that came out in 2012 that people really haven't talked about. I became aware of it probably in 2013 or 2014 because we had a rash of folks at work that had wireless mice that we upgraded their PC and their old mouse stopped working. But if you unplugged it from the back of the computer and put it on an extension cable or plugged it into the side of the monitor, it seemed to work. So one of the techs did some research and showed me this Intel article, and then we started getting these USB cables with the built-in RF chokes in them, and that took care of the folks that had those problems. But the reason why this is significant is a lot more of the amateur radio stuff we're dealing with. You know, I have some USB gadgets here that I had to keep plugged in the USB 2.0 for the longest time. And I'm wondering if it wasn't actually a problem with the USB 3.0 protocol as much as it was with this interference. Well, here's a good example. I'm looking right at my WinKeyer, and on my desktop, if I plug the WinKeyer in the rear USB 3 ports, it drops off while I'm trying to transmit in CW. If I plug it in the USB 2.0 ports in the front of the machine, or I plug it in the Raspberry Pi, it works fine. Well, the Raspberry Pi is USB 2.0. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is, Bill. And, you know, I didn't think about this, but it is a good one. Ed, what's your thought?
Well, what I find very interesting is the fact that the article is from Intel, and Intel were one of the parties, as far as I understand, who defined USB 3. So what's going on here? And why has it taken so long for this information to come to the fore? Well, it probably hasn't taken so long because Bill was saying he's known about it for a while, but this particular report that's in our show tonight is basically saying this is a problem. It's a problem where it's causing interference and stopping 2.3 gigahertz devices from working, but the graphs show it causing interference over the whole of the HF bands and into the microwaves. So Intel seemed to be pointing out a problem that they maybe were part of causing.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think it's like a lot of things. If you don't if you don't have a reason to track it down, and Bill's tech obviously did, but if we just got a computer and some are USB 2 and some are USB 3 in the shack, and some things don't work and some do, you just look at it and go, well, maybe not, And I think this has now made the mainstream with this news article that we're probably making a lot of people aware of it so they can track things down. But there's all sorts of things. I mean, over the last few months, we've had Raspberry Pi 4s transmitting in the aircraft band. This is another one. Lots of things like this. What do you think, Chris?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I remember the Raspberry Pi. I remember testing it myself, and it was definitely oscillating in that range. I think with USB, because actually a lot of radio, we're now starting to converge, computing and radio. We've got software-defined radios, that sort of thing, and cat control using USB. So, my ICOM radio, in fact, both of my ICOM and my ASA radios have both got USB ports. Obviously, I'm using software-defined receiver dongles that work over USB, so you can't really get away from having, using USB. So if it's potentially going to cause interference, that's a problem. I don't think I had one at SDR quite a few years ago now. I had one SDR dongle which was quite badly interfered with by my USB port on my computer at the time. But that's a few years ago now, and that was fixed by getting a USB cable that had ferrite rings around it, which fixed that problem. But yeah, I'm surprised it's something that's only just come to light. Like I say, I think there's a lot of USB, and let's face it, it's general computer stuff now linked with radios, and I guess potentially it could be a problem. But there are ways that as amateurs find to get around these. We know about how to suppress interference and get things to play nicely together. So hopefully it's not going to cause too many issues.
Yeah, I agree with you. At least we've raised its awareness now to the masses. So hopefully, you guys, if you have these problems, you can at least look and see if you got USB and that 3, and that might actually be your problem. So there you go. Right, moving to our next news story, and there's a new Friendship on the Air award. The RSGB have now just come out with a new award, and it's really just making contacts. It's part of their Get on the Air to Care campaign as it moves forward, and they keep updating and improving it. So, but I think this could be interesting. Chris, I'm going to get you first on this one because it's a UK story. It only came out yesterday. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea, getting folks to actually. I mean, amateur radio is a fellowship, isn't it? I know people around the world now because I'm amateur radio. So actually, this is almost promoting more of that. So I think the point here is talks about being, making contacts in a friendly and non-competitive way. So rather than, I guess, the usual sort of contest 5-9, here's your number, off I go, it's actually a bit more of a conversation. So I think it's a great idea, and I think as part of lockdown, as we've seen with this Get on the Air to Care campaign, which I think has been very successful from what we've heard, this sort of helps to alleviate some of that and gets people to actually, people have a conversation with somebody, and often it's the case on radio that you're not always talking to somebody that you know. You're sometimes talking to someone that you've never met before in your life, and you're actually having a conversation about many, many subjects. So, I think it's a great idea, and it will help people that are stuck at home that perhaps aren't talking to many of the people. So, I'm very much up for this one.
Yeah, and if you you have to put your club's identifier into the log. But if you're not a member of a club, then you can use the word RSGB. So it's not excluding anybody. And in fairness, the RSGB are doing this for all amateurs in the UK. Oh, no, I'm going to say all amateurs worldwide. There's no reason why others couldn't join in on this. What's your thoughts, Ed?
Yeah, I was going to touch on exactly that point. One of the things that surprised me and probably surprised the RSGB with the Get on the Air to Care scheme was that it wasn't just a UK scheme. It was actually of interest and taken part in by people from around the world. And I was going to say exactly what you just said there, Martin. This doesn't need to be just a UK friendship award. there's no reason why it couldn't be other countries involved as well, which is great. And nice to see the RSGB taking the lead on this. I think it's something that is natural within the amateur radio community, but it's good to underline when people are actually having conversations in QSOs, not letting their computers talk to each other or contest contacts. I think it's other things apart from that, whether it be CW, AM or SSB or FM or AM. And I think it's great. I think it's good on them, and wish them all the luck with it.
Yeah, I agree totally with you, Ed, on that one. As I say, it's good. It could be international if we wanted it to be, or if need be. It's really down to the individual that's taking part. Bill, are you likely to make any contacts in this and try and get some wallpaper?
Oh, you know it, but I'm not sure how the bands will cooperate or not. That's the other thing, is I won't have a 4-letter identifier because I'm not in a UK club.
Well, you can use RSGB as your identifier.
Have I got a job you can clone, John, if you want, Bill?
Yeah, that's true. There might be a club that we might know about that I've been to more meetings than the local
That's
ones.
true, actually. Yes, you could actually join if you wanted to. I'm sending you the phone.
But anyway, I do like these kind of on-the-air events, and I'm so glad they're actually doing that. It's good. I mean, all this stuff is good, and anything to keep the bands busy without being, ridiculous CQ Worldwide WPX SSB contest like a few weekends ago. That was too busy. But aside from that, anything keeping the bands active is a good thing.
Totally agree with you, Bill. Totally agree with you on that. Then, just as a little side note, I mean, we're not doing something as big as the RSGB. This is going to be lots of publicity and lots of people involved. But our little talk group on DMR, Talk Group 9480, it really seems to have paid off, and there are people that do turn up for a chat, and sometimes the chats go on quite some time, but don't be afraid to join in, because there are people that just enjoy a chat all around the world. And as much as people are using digital modes like Ft8 and the like, there are still people that would really just like to have a little chat and ask you what's going on in your part of the world and all those sort of things. So, the RSGB thing is great, because we're certainly seeing it in our talk group. So there you go. Right, moving to our last news story, and kind of it isn't really a news story, I suppose, but I hijacked Dan's blog, and his title was Ohms, Amperes and Voltaires, and it talks about Dan having a chat with somebody with the surname of Ohm, and then going off and doing a lookup of other names. Chris, you quite liked this one, didn't you?
I did like this one, yes. I do like Dan's blog, and I spotted this the other day. And I know Dan, he also likes to collect QSL cards with people that have a name in their call sign. So this is a good one. I like this, Dan. Well done. It's just a little funny one, isn't it? But I think he was saying there were so many people on there that had the various different things in their call signs. So, in their names. Sorry. So you never know. Some of these folks might be related to the original Mr. Volta or Ohm or Ampere. So yes, very good.
Yeah, well, as I say, just a bit of fun, and I thought we'd raise it at the end. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Well, one comment at the end of it is that he also went off and checked how many people he could find with the surname Marconi as well. So anything to do with radio or electronics. And just a heads up, a bit of advertising for the guys in Italy. Next year sees the World Radio Team Sport Championships, and they are based around the old home of Marconi in Bologna. So if you like, the Olympics of amateur radio are going back to where it all started almost. And so the competition is going to be around, based out of the centre, which was an old home for one of Marconi's old homes. And yeah, Mr. Volters and Amperes and so on with names, they must be quite strange to be called one of those names. Oh no, sorry. Don says he couldn't find a single ampere, so he didn't find anybody. But the 45 volters and also 45 Marconis was quite a find in the QRZ.com database, and it's nice. It's a nice little story to end on.
Yeah, unfortunately, none of us made it into the Dan's list. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I'm like, hey man, how many bills did you find? But pick on Dan's blog. Okay, now there's a new story I can do. No, the interesting thing about this is this isn't actually an all-inclusive list, because not every country provides a complete, digestible electronic version of their call sign databases. So the countries that do, QRZ has them in there probably. Those that don't, it's up to the radio amateur in those countries to register themselves on QRZ so they can be searched. So there might even be more folks that have, ohms, amperes, or voltas as their names, or even Marconis. But still, it's a fun little exercise. And just one aside is, I was spinning around the bands I think it was last week, and Dan was on 40 meters working somebody for like 20 minutes to a half hour or something. They were having a full-blown CW so they were going a tad fast, but even then, even to have a QSO that long, well, I'm assuming it was the same person he was working. He would probably have gotten into, towns, weather, station details. Basically each of their life stories sent over 22 to 25 words per minute CW. So that's when he said he was working rag chewing, he was doing on Morse.
Right. Well, we wasn't sure, but you confirmed you heard him rag chewing on Morse, so I should have known better. Dan has been known to be up on Talk Group 9480 though.
Yes, just on that QRZ point, yes, you're right. In the UK, I was aware in the States that the FCC have got a feed that goes straight into QRZ.com, so you can you will appear there automatically without even requesting it. But here in the UK, and I guess probably also over Europe, because of GDPR, that's never going to happen. So yeah, you absolutely have to go on there and register yourself. And it's a shame, because I remember when we get people starting out in the hobby and wondering what call signs are available before they can apply for one. Sometimes they think one's free and actually it's not, but the person hasn't registered on QRZ.com. So, but yeah, that's an interesting one. That's in the States and maybe other countries, like you say, you automatically appear on QRZ.com without even requesting it.
Yep, it's a public document.
Yeah, good news on that. So a nice little one to end on. That's what I thought anyway. And thank you for that one, Dan, even though you didn't know I was going to steal it off your website. Hi. Okay. Bill, I know you got a hard stop, so I'm going to ask you, what have you been up to since the last time we had a chat?
So the weather finally broke. We are now fully engulfed in spring, so that means I got to do Antenna Mania 2K21. The window's down, the loop is up, and I'm back on the air. And that whole procedure went well. 264 feet of just awesome wire strung between 3 trees and a post I stuck on the corner of the house. And so we got a sky loop up. Still trying to figure out, well, I mean, it's pretty much omnidirectional on 80 meters. 40 and above, it starts to get some interesting nulls in it. And the nulls appear to be different than the Wyndham, but I don't really have a good feel yet for where I'm getting out and where I'm missing. So at this point, it's nice. Sky low antenna work done. I got a few things I want to button up here. I want to change some things out, put some springs in the rope. I didn't put the springs up, and we had a windstorm. It survived, but I decided I'm going to go back through and put some springs on there. Give it a little bit of leeway. Aside from that, it's about 45 feet up. So I got it up as high as I could, which on any kind of horizontal loop antenna, you want it as high as possible. So yeah, antenna mania. As far as being on the radio, chasing a whole bunch of soda summits. I worked N2GBR 3 times, NK8Q twice. Worked a couple of the last man standing special events, and that's about it. So, oh yeah, I did do the Barks HF Riddy contest, the spring contest, for, I don't know, 2 hours or something the other weekend. So that also happened since the last time I was on. So very, very, very busy.
Certainly sounds like it, Bill. Certainly sounds like it. And, well, sounds like you've also been having some fun, so that's good news. Ed, what have you been up to?
Yeah, well, already touched on a little bit of it in the earlier part of the show. But I just want to come back to Bill's comment of the weather broke into spring with you. Not here. I'm sat in the middle of a snow blizzard. It's this last week, it's gone back to being winter here. It's actually snow on the ground and cold. Day temperatures between like -5 and +5. And that goes into one of the other bad stories in the last week or so. I mentioned that HEMA launched on the 5th. I couldn't take part because partially the weather and partially HEMA in DL, that is in southern Germany. But also a couple of weeks ago, I was out doing a SOTA activation, and I found all of a sudden that the radio wasn't working, and the reason was the USB port on it was damaged. And as I control my radio from outside of the rucksack using a Android phone via a USB cable, when the USB socket is broken, I can't actually adjust anything because the display on the rig in the sunlight is totally unreadable. So I had a problem, and I've spent the last 2 weeks working on that. This is a micro USB socket on a board that's all SMD, so surface mount device components. The socket's not SMD, but it's surrounded by them. So you can imagine the problems I've had with getting that out. I managed to find an exact replacement, and I'm in the middle of trying to put that in at the moment, but it's been one nightmare after another trying to repair that, unfortunately. Oh, the other thing I've done since last time was the QSO Today Virtual Hamfest, where, as was mentioned, I presented, and I also acted as help and support for some of the other presenters in their Q&A sessions. And yeah, that's about it over the last 4 weeks. So quite a few issues related to repairing hardware, unfortunately, and no antenna work to speak of. That'll hopefully come when the spring eventually gets here. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, fine, Ed. No, it sounds like you've been very, very busy and enjoying it. So that's good news. Chris, have you been busy as well?
Probably not that busy compared to what just been read out there, but talking of spring, yeah, well, I think spring did arrive, and then it seems to have gone again. So it's gone cold again here. Not quite what Ed's describing. No inches of snow, but we've had a few snowflakes drop on us last couple of days. But it seemed to go warm, then it seems to have gone sadly cold again. So hopefully things are going to start to improve shortly, shall we say? But in terms of radio stuff, what I've been doing, yeah, aerial maintenance. Yeah, I replaced the wire on my dipole for HF, my offset fed dipole. It was, for some reason, it stopped working at 80 meters, and I tried fixing it and made it a lot worse. So I ended up going onto Amazon and buying a length of slightly thicker wire, and that's now up there, and that's back working again pretty well. So I'm quite pleased about that. I have also, I can't remember if I did this on the last episode or not. Probably not. I've also bought a new radio. I bought an LA-Craft KX3, which I've been learning about and quite pleased with. Works very, very well. And I actually did a video on how to use the voice keyer that's built in, which actually I posted onto the LA-Craft KX3 Facebook group and had quite some positive feedback. So that's pretty good. So that's been fun to play with that little radio. And I've also gone a bit power pole mad. I bought an Anderson power pole crimp tool and some power poles, and I also bought a distribution box. In fact, it only arrived yesterday. I built it. It came as a kit. So I've now got a little distribution box that goes into the power supply, and then it's a lot neater really than having lots of wires coming out the power supply. Now I've just got one pair of wires coming out of the power supply, and then I've got all my various bits of kit connecting via power poles into that box. So that's gone very well, and it's much better than the previous solution. So quite pleased about that as well. And the only final thing is, and Bill reminded me of this, I did also work the last man standing station as well, but I used DMR to do it. So I tried to get anything D-Star on a previous day, but I wasn't able to get through. And I think actually it's to do with the way I've got my hotspot configured. So I need to have a look at that at some point and get D-Star working on that properly. I could hear them okay, but I don't think they were hearing me. So anyway, I got through the next day on DMR and got myself in there log, which is good. So yeah, that's it from me, Martin.
Yeah, it does sound like you've been busy. Well, say, it has been busy last few weeks. Well, me, what have I been up to? Well, obviously, Talk Group 9480. I've been doing a lot of work on that. A lot of chatting. I really have. And we've had tremendous feedback from the people that are on there that they find people most hours of the day and night. What I will say is don't just blip it. Put a few calls out. And then if you don't hear anybody, leave it an hour or so and put another few calls out, because there are people coming on and off with different time zones. I mean, I think there's something like 20 countries now that have shown up in the talk group. So you will hear people at different times of the day. I'm also working on a code plug for Edmund. Edmund's got a strange DMR radio, and I've taken his code plug and I've tried to dissect it and make sense of the person's code plugging ability that wrote it for him in the first place. So I'm changing that for him, and hopefully that will work soon. Last thing on DMR I'd like to talk about is, and I keep mentioning this, and most people go, well, it's not real radio. They're right. DroidStar. DroidStar is an absolutely great device. You can communicate with us via DroidStar on your mobile phone. But it's more than just a radio emulator into the digital modes. What I'm finding it very useful for is if I want to check that my hotspot or my radio is actually working. So I've had times when I've sat there and I thought, there's nothing happening. Yeah, and there was a time when my hotspot had locked up and nothing was happening. And putting a call through from my mobile phone and having my radio sitting next to me, and it didn't come out of the radio, I knew I was in fault condition. The other thing is you can check both ways. So if you transmit on your radio into the talk group and you've got your DroidStar set up for that talk group number, you can hear yourself come back out again like an echo test. So I wouldn't suggest you have them both on when you're in a communications, because you'll have echo loops going round and round and round. But DroidStar is quite useful as a diagnostic tool. I've been clearing out my junk room, or my storeroom as I should call it. I've been getting rid of some odds and ends. Oh, surprising how many mains cables and SCART cables that you end up accumulating, because you just put them in there and think, I won't do anything with them. They're gone, and move on. BitX40, I've been playing with my BitX40. Struggling to get a microphone on it, but I've got one on now. The one I wanted to use, it just didn't set itself up for what it needed to, so I've got a different one on there. That's all now finished. Did try some Ft8, Bill. Unfortunately, having zero success. Absolutely brilliant decoding, but my ICOM 703, the software says, and I'm using with a signal link, so I plug into the data socket in the back. It keys up my radio, but the software, the Ft8 software, says that it's expecting the audio to go into the front mic socket, and it's grayed out.
There's two different ports on the back of that connector. One's for the HF audio, the other one's for VHF audio.
Yeah.
So you got to check your cable from the signal link to the back of the 703 and make sure you're going to the HF audio.
But it works all right when I use PSK31 or any other mode. It just doesn't work with Ft8.
Huh.
So, yeah, precisely. And the audio input is all greyed out on mine. So it's saying it's expecting the front socket, but it's greyed out. So it just, the radio key's up, but it doesn't put any signal out. So a little bit annoying. I've gone off with Huff for the moment. When I get a bit more time, I'll try and see if there's anything else I can do. Did call into the Last Man Standing group, I think. Somebody acknowledged me, but didn't have a conversation or such. So hopefully I did do the Last Man Standing login. And lastly, like you, Chris, I'm looking at my off-center dipole thinking that balun in the middle, or the balun on it, is looking a bit lower than I thought it should be. And I'm wondering if my wires have stretched over the winter. So going to put the analyzer on it soon, see what's what, and maybe I have to replace the 2 lengths of wire to get it back on tune again. But that's what I've been up to. So I think we've all been busy.
We have. I say I must just thank, by the way, you remember me with the talk group. I must just thank Phil Heckingbottom, BK6ADF. It was his suggestion around the power poles and the kits a bit for that, and it's worked very well. So, and that was a chat from on the talk group there. So that was good. I know Phil's a regular listener and a regular contributor to the DMR talk group. So thanks for that, Phil. That was really helpful.
Yeah. Phil's down in Western Australia, for those of you who don't know. So don't expect him on UK times particularly, although Phil does tend to stay up quite late. I often check with him whether it's near his bedtime or not, because we have to be sensible about it. Middle of the afternoon's getting close in the UK. Is getting close to Phil's bedtime, so just be aware of that one. And the same with other time groups around the world. Right, I'd like to thank you all for joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Thank you, Martin. Another good one, I think.
That's a good one. I'd like to thank Mr. Durrant, DD5LP.
Yep, thanks again, and always a pleasure.
Yeah, we're getting close to the 350 mark. And I'd like to thank Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B.
Yes, thank you for the invite again, and I had a good time.
And we got it all done before your hard stop, Bill.
Yes, you did, on the button.
Only just. Okay, 73 all.
73.
73.
For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin, M6BOY. Since recording the news roundtable, we've come to learn the news that His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, passed away on Friday the 9th of April. Maybe unbeknown to many in the general public, the Royal Highness was a massive fan of technology, and nothing showed this more than the fact that his interest in radio, which probably sparked back to his naval days, was cemented in his patronage to the Royal Society of Great Britain, which he undertook in 1952. Along with that, he joined the Society on many occasions over those years, including special event station, anniversary events and exhibitions. Including those he attended the 70th anniversary convention at the NEC in Birmingham, touring many displays of amateur radio equipment throughout the ages. He exchanged short greeting messages with Windsor Castle. His opening address was included in a special edition of the RSGB News that was carried that day from the NEC. Also known as the Duke's award scheme, the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and to couple along with that as well, he also sent his support as well for the Youth on the Air programme as well, particularly in 2017, where he joined the camp there, the Youngsters on the Air camp as well. So I'm sure you join us at this time as well to pass on our condolences to, say, the Duke's family and Her Royal Highness, the Queen Elizabeth II's family at this time. And as I say, it's good to remember, as I say, not only a wonderful servant in public life, but also someone as well that cherished our hobby as well and understood a lot of the technology that we used. We move on to Ireland now, where there's been a launch of a new national shortwave listeners club. Now, along with, broadcast, etc., they're also going to be carrying out online training courses as well. And as I say, the first one has just commenced. They're going to be using the Zoom platform for their classes and their meetings, etc. So say they're welcoming anyone to come along. The club is also affiliated with the Irish Radio Transmitter Society, and we've got an email on the ICQ podcast webpage for anybody that would like to get in touch with them and become a member. Final news story for this section. Kanga Kits, the UK kit builders, are unfortunately closing down their business and putting the business up for sale. This is pretty much due to ill health of the owner. And so with no signing of the illness getting any better, they've decided to move on to other phases of their life. So there is still some support available, and there are obviously still some kits, etc. available south on the website kanga-products.co.uk. But it does look like that Kanga are looking for a new buyer to see if they can continue on in business. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode, which is a feature on kit building tips with Joe Eisenberg, Kilo 0 November Echo Bravo. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode's feature. Tonight, I'm joined by Joe Eisenberg, K0NEB. And you tell me NEB stands for Nebraska, didn't you, Joe?
Yes, it is. That is where I'm from. And actually, that call sign back in the 1960s and early 70s belonged to the Nebraska State Fair. Kind of, state fairs are an American institution. And the call sign hadn't been used in many years, so I decided that would be a good call sign.
Sounds good to me. Well, I was lucky. Best part of 10 years ago, because I've got to renew it in the end of this year, but I got W9 ICQ when I passed my American exam, so I was quite pleased with that one. So obviously yours means something to you, and mine means something to me. Joe, I know you do a lot of things in the hobby, and I know you've been in the hobby quite some time. I think you got your first license in 1969, but give us how you got into the hobby, what turns you on, what excites you in the hobby, and what keeps you still enjoying it.
All right. Well, my Elmer was Leo Meyerson, and his call sign was W0GFQ. And Leo was a friend of the family and introduced me to shortwave radio about the age of about 8, and convinced my father to pick up a relatively inexpensive Hallicrafter's S120 general coverage receiver. And so I listened to that till I was about 14, and then I was invited to take a code class and novice class at World Radio Laboratories, which was the company that Leo owned. Now, for those who know a little bit about amateur radio history, World Radio Laboratories manufactured the Globe kits and the Galaxy radios back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And so I actually got to watch my first transceiver, the Galaxy GT550, being manufactured right across the river from Omaha, Nebraska, which is where I'm originally from. I live in Lincoln. My job traditionally has been an IT field tech, but I'm mostly retired now. I write the monthly kit building column in CQ magazine, and I have since 2009, so I am in my 12th year of writing for CQ. And I am now the author of the Construction Techniques chapter in the ARL Handbook since the 2014 edition. At HamFest, especially Dayton, you'll see me wearing the red and white cat in the hat. That's so everybody can find me in the crowd. And I'm always taking pictures at HamFest and making slideshows and so forth. And of course, speaking and teaching people about building kits. And of course, building kits has always been a big part of radio for me since before I got my license, and really enjoy it. But I also enjoy other things like DXing and contesting and field day and other kinds of things in amateur radio, because we have so many things that we can choose from in amateur radio that it's hard to stay with just one thing. But I am predominantly a kit builder.
Well, I quite actually agree with you, because I've built a number of kits in my time, and I'm sure you're going to tell me, but it's that feeling when you've built something and you switch it on and it works. I remember building, as I first came into the hobby about 20 years ago, building a shortwave receiver, switching it on, had a bit of old wire running down the garden. It wasn't tuned, it wasn't any particular length, and heard stations from Germany. And it was like $1 million, quite honestly. I assume that's the thing that gets you excited.
Yeah, and even more the magic of making a contact on something that you made yourself. And kit building lets you also learn about how things are physically constructed in electronics and about the different parts and what they do, and gives you the opportunity to say, hey, I might be able to make this minor change and I can improve on it. And that's part of the magic of amateur radio.
Certainly is. And with a kit, normally they're big enough in the size of the components that you can actually work on them and make modifications. And if you make a big mistake, it isn't going to cost you like $2,000, is it, for a replacement?
Oh, no. And there's a kind of an interesting trend in kit building now. There are a good number of kits that are out there now that have surface mount parts. And those are pretty difficult to deal with. And there are some kits that you have to solder all those. And there's a lot of kits that have those parts already done for you. A good example would be the Nouveau 75, which is a 75-meter AM transceiver that's put out by the Ft8 QRP group. It uses circuit board material for the case, and it has over 130 surface mount components that are already on the main board. So that leaves the builder with about 30 through-hole parts that they have to place on the board, and you have a working kit. And so the trend lately has been to hybrid kits, and leaving the builder, of course, with the conventional through-hole parts. And, of course, you're not going to get away without having to wind those toroids.
No, but toroids are not that difficult. I mean, if you're anything like me, Joe, the situation is you realise you're going to have to wind the toroids. All you need to do is just sit there quietly and do it. It's not, I think if you wind yourself up, they're difficult. If you just sit there and you're enjoying the build process, winding a toroid is quite easy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of builders, though, who tell me they won't build a kit that has them, and I keep doing little seminars on how to wind them and how to do it right, because once you got the knack to it, you're going to be able to successfully wind and mount your toroids, and they're going to work. And I give little tips and tricks on it. A good example is that I thoroughly clean the wire. Now, sometimes it's got thick insulation on it, and I end up using like a cigarette lighter, and I burn it off. Then I take an emery board and I sand it smooth so it's bright copper colored. Then I take the soldering iron and I tin that before I ever put it on the board. And some of the toroids, they have enameled wire that responds to heat. And what I do is I heat the iron up all the way and I make a blob of solder on the tip. And then I hold it just a short distance away from the toroid, and I hold it there, and it melts the insulation off. And as I draw it very slowly away from the toroid, it not only melts the insulation off and cleans it off, it tins the wire.
Well, I've found that when I've helped people at the club that have built kits, one of the most common failures I've found with people who are doing toroids is they don't clean it off like you've said. And if you don't clean the wires off, basically you end up with a solder blob around the installation, and your toroid is about as useful as a chocolate fireguard. Yeah, What I tend to do, and I don't know if you do it, is I always ohms the toroids out after I put them in the board. I always ohms the connections across just to make sure they really are making connection with the board.
Yeah, I do that as well. I simply, a lot of times I'll just put my meter in the beep mode so I can do continuity check without even having to look at the meter. And I'll test each of the points on there to make sure that one winding is not necessarily connected to another and so forth when you have multiple windings and things like that. I also sometimes test them before I put them on the board as well.
Right. So toroids can be a problem, but in fairness, like you're saying, if you do it properly and you just sit down and do the project, you'll probably find you'll have no problems at all. The only problems I've ever found fixing kits that don't work for people is because they've been so impatient, in such a hurry to get it built, to get it on the air, and they make stupid mistakes.
Yep, I always tell people to take their time. One of the hints that I do is I turn on sometimes a broadcast radio and I listen to my favorite classic rock station and kind of sit back and enjoy it, because I remember when I first started kit building, I was the same way. I would get so excited to get this thing done that I would just go super fast and not realize I left shorts, I didn't solder thoroughly, things like that. And that kind of brings up another topic that's related to that, and that is what kind of solder to use. And I don't know about the UK. I know in Europe they require the lead-free solder. I don't know about the UK, but here we're still allowed to use leaded solder. And what I use is 6337. Now, most kit builders here seem to be using 6040 type solder, and that's been around for many decades. But the 6337 is just a slightly different blend. And what it does is we call it eutectic, and it wets better, it flows through the holes better, it melts only a couple of degrees Celsius cooler than conventional 6040. But the 6337 has a much shorter plastic state. Now, what that means is that it cools off quick enough that you have a much less chance of a cold solder joint if something moved or something like that during the cooling process. So if you go into a factory, and I have as one of my customers an electronics factory here in Lincoln, and I see people working with nice temperature controlled soldering stations, which is another must, but they use a 6337. Now, I recommend the 0.031 inch or 0.025 inch thickness, either one, and rosin core and no clean. That way you don't have those ugly brown splotches. Whatever is left in terms of flux is transparent or not there. So I use, once again, my doctor's prescription is 6337 solder, rosin core, no clean. But like I said, I'm not sure what they allow in the UK.
Well, in the UK, technically we've gone over to lead-free solder. However, commercially people are supposed to use lead-free solder. For the sort of things us hobbyists do, there is still leaded solder around, and you can often pick it up at a rally. Unfortunately, because it's fairly scarce, there tends to be a premium on it. And yeah, I've always used 6040, but then I've been soldering for the last 50 years. And in many ways, I really ought to try the 6337 because that could be interesting. And something I haven't tried, but certainly rosin core solder. But what you're saying is having different gauges of solder. If you're doing some very, very fine work, obviously you want fine solder. But if you're doing something that requires quite a bit of solder, if you've got fine solder, you'll use masses of it to make a joint. So you do need varying sizes, as you said, to make your life easy, really, isn't it?
Yeah, what my rule of thumb is to never use a soldering iron tip or a thickness of solder that's thicker than the pads that you're soldering on the circuit board. And sometimes my solder tip is a little thick, and rather than change the tip, I'll sometimes just go to the thinner solder. But I'm not going to use that real thin solder when I'm soldering antennas, like soldering a dipole or something with stranded 14 gauge wire. For that, I do use 60/40, and I use a gun or a much hotter soldering iron or one of those little butane torches or something to heat it up. But on circuit boards, once again, the thickness should never be thicker than the pad you're trying to solder, because that's asking for trouble where you get a blob that's between 2 points and you'll have a dead short. So that kind of brings up the point of soldering stations. And I prefer temperature controlled, variable temperature soldering stations. Now, not all are thermostatically controlled. Some of them are just variable. You want to get one that is actually has like a digital display and shows you what temperature it is, because that's going to be a lot more accurate. It's going to be able to deliver a lot more heat when it's needed, when you're soldering a connection. And when you're not, it's going to back off and it's not going to overheat the tip. These little $6 soldering irons that we find in the store sometimes here, those have no regulation at all. In fact, the tip has an AC potential. So you want to look for a soldering iron or soldering station that has a grounded tip. That way you don't have an AC voltage potential on things like CMOS parts.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, I personally own about a dozen different soldering irons, all for different sort of jobs. So, what I'd say, like you are saying to the listeners, you've got to have the right tool for the job. I mean, I came across a soldering iron I had that I was using in the 1970s in the bottom of my junk room, and I was fixing circuit boards with it. But television circuit boards had massive thick tracks compared with today. You wouldn't go anywhere near a modern circuit board with this iron, and it wasn't temperature controlled. But it is horses for courses, as you say, and temperature controlled ones are great because sometimes you just need that little bit more heat, and you can just turn it up for a few seconds to get that heat to do the particular joint you want to do, and then back it back to a sensible level afterwards, can't you, Joe?
Yep. Well, I tell you, I can't emphasize enough using the right kind of solder and soldering station, because temperature control obviously is going to allow it to flow correctly and a lot less chance of a bad solder connection. It's going to look a lot better. And my goal is to get kit builders to succeed when they build a kit. And that's because if you get a first-time builder and he can't even get a simple kit to work because he's using inadequate tools or solder or things like that, they're never going to build a kit again, no matter how cheap or whatever it is. The other thing that brings up is standardized parts. And I always emphasize this in my seminars, because when you're building a kit, there's nothing more frustrating than to be on Sunday night and you're missing a 10K quarter watt resistor. Okay. So what I tell people to do is you can look online, and many electronics parts supply houses sell standardized parts that are pre-sorted in bags or trays or something like that. They have these assortments that have all the standard values of resistors. You can get capacitors, transistors, diodes, whole assortments of these things. And it's great to have them pre-sorted and ready to go, because not only do you have a spare part in case one is missing, but you also have parts available in case there's some kind of future modification. Like they might say, oh, the regeneration in this regenerative receiver works a lot better if you put a 50K resistor between this point and this point. Or if you put a 1 meg resistor across this and this, it'll bleed off the static and won't cause a problem. Things like that. or change the frequency of a side tone, or change the capacitor might change the characteristic of a low pass or band pass filter, things like that. So it's always good to have standardized spare parts pre-sorted and ready to go, because when you're building a kit, like I said, if you're missing a simple part, there's no place to go.
And the other thing with your standard kits, and I agree 100% with you, and over time you tend to build these up and probably end up with too much. But often I used to find you'd be reading a magazine and somebody'd have a very, very simple circuit. In it, half a dozen resistors and a couple of transistors and a couple of capacitors, and you think, oh, that's handy, I could build that. And if you've got a box like you're saying with a standard kit in it, you can knock that together on a bit of breadboard very quickly and have a test. And so, whereas you're saying kits are one thing, there'll also be times when you'll just see something in a magazine and go, oh, that looks interesting, I might give that a try. And you can, if you've got spare bits laying around, you can do it very quickly, can't you?
Exactly. In fact, having a little proto boards, things like that available, or prototyping kits available, you can wire up a little circuit real quickly and say, oh, this works. And then you can take a circuit board and you can stick pads down on it, and you can do what we call Manhattan style, and you can put the circuit together. And once again, because you already have the parts, you're not going to run all over the place to get them. And there are a lot of suppliers worldwide that have these assortments, and they're usually quite affordable. And that's another thing that I look for at ham fests and conventions, is somebody selling standardized parts.
You certainly do. So we talked about soldering in kits. What would be, and I'm probably going to put you on the spot here, what would be a good kit to start off with? I mean, I'm assuming that you're not being sponsored by somebody, but what would be a good one to start off with?
Well, of course, for a lot of people, the simple code practice oscillator is a good kit. And there's a particular one that's put out by the Ft8 QRP group. And I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I'm a member of their group. In fact, we're having our online meeting instead of in person this week. But they have a variety of very simple kits. And one of them is called the SSCPO. And it's simply a couple of transistors, a couple of resistors, and a couple of capacitors and a speaker, and the stuff to make a straight key. And you can send Morse code with the thing, obviously to practice. So a simple code practice oscillator, you're not going to spend a lot of time putting it together, and you're going to be able to enjoy it and say, oh, well, I built this. What else is there? Well, we can move up, and they have a kit called the NS40. And that kit is a 5-watt CW transmitter. And it's also very simple and puts out a really good signal. And the NS40 only has, I think, about a dozen or so parts, but it puts out, like I said, a really good CW signal, and it's crystal controlled, and it's on the 40-meter band. And then if you want to get a little more fancy, there's one called the Cricket, and these are all from 4sqrp.com. And the neat thing about the NS40 as well as the Cricket is you don't have to do those dreaded toroids. The inductors are spiral wound on the circuit board, and so it's a very complicated mathematical formula to do that, to make an inductor on a circuit board. But the guy that designs these kits, the ones that I've described so far, is a Collins radio engineer in Iowa. And so the Cricket series of kits, there's an 80, 40, and 30-meter version, and from what I'm rumored, a 20-meter version coming. And it's a 1-watt CW transceiver, and it's crystal controlled. And so obviously you're going to want to have some rocks for different frequencies within the band. The straight key is part of it. You plug in a headphones and you plug in an antenna and a 9-volt battery. And with that 9-volt battery, you get almost exactly 1 watt out. And there's, like I said, no toroids to wind, simple regular parts to do. But I wouldn't tackle this kit until you've done something simpler, like a code practice oscillator or a very simple receiver or things like that. But still, this is a very fun kit, and we've done these as group kit builds, and just a whole lot of fun. There are other kits. I mean, we can go all the way up to the Ft8 Phaser, and this is put out by a company called Midnight Design Solutions. And it's a single sideband synthesized digital modes transceiver. And it has simply a power switch on the back and 12 volts that comes in and an antenna output. It puts out about 4.5 watts of single sideband, has about a 3 kilohertz wide receiver bandwidth, and it has 2 buttons on the front. One says Ft8 and one says aux. And you can set the auxiliary one to any frequency you want. So like your left button could be obviously Ft8, but by pushing buttons and stuff, the buttons in certain sequences, kind of like doing CW, you can tell it what you want the frequency of the other button to be. So I know one guy who used it so that the auxiliary button is for FT4. Another person uses it for Olivia. Another person uses it for PSK31. And all you got to do is set it so it goes to that frequency. So when you turn it on, the LED comes on the Ft8 as a default, and you just push the other button, boom, the synthesizer puts you on the other frequency. It has an audio in and audio out jack, and you use simple audio cables to hook to your computer, and no special interface needed other than the standard 3-circuit audio cables that are common to computers. And it uses Vox to trip the relay in there, and away it goes. And it's a neat kit, and like the 4-state kit, it uses printed circuit board material to form the cabinet. Now, they do charge extra for the cabinet on this one, but it's already drilled, plated through, marked, silk screened, everything, and makes a really nice case and a really fun little kit to get on digital modes for not very much money.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned cases, or if you're making a very cheap kit, yes, you can put it in a sandwich box or whatever if you're not going to use it seriously. But if you're starting to spend serious money on kits, I tend to look at what extra hardware there's around. Is there a professional case comes with it? Because it does make it, A, look much better, and B, protect it. And I think that's something that I would certainly go with if I was looking to build something. Is there a case available for it?
Yeah, in fact, you can still get bud boxes and other cases here in the States, but we have a lot of kits that are still made that use that old British standby, the Altoids tin. And I have several kits, including CW transceivers and so forth. I think Kanga UK still makes kits that fit in an Altoids tin. And I use it myself. I have several kits that are in Altoids tins, CW transceivers, code practice oscillators, receivers, transceivers, things like that. But these cases made out of printed circuit board material really, really look professional, and they give it a double shielded cabinet and very, very strong. And so that's kind of the latest trend because they are a lot less expensive. Now, there's another option, and that is that some kits on their website might have a link with what we call an STL file. And what that is that's the recipe for a 3D printer. And so all you do is you download the STL file and you import that into what we call the slicer program, which then interprets it and creates a file for your 3D printer. And I use my 3D printer, and I've made several different kit cases that were already pre-designed by the kit manufacturers, and I make the cases for the kits. So there's several different options when you're dealing with building a cabinet for a kit.
There certainly is. Now, what I've found is that if the kit is a big kit and a lot to do on it, when we get back to being able to all meet up together and do things, don't be afraid as a club member to say, why don't we build this kit as a club? Because there will be people at different levels of skill that maybe need a bit of help to see if they've built it right. And the other thing is, once you've all built the same kit, you can sort of line them up next to each other and see how well they work and if they're in tolerance. If you build one kit on your own, you're never 100% sure, unless you've got all the test equipment, that it's performing to its optimum. But if you've got half a dozen people who built the same kit, you got half a dozen options. You can say, well, yeah, they all appear to operate the same or whatever. So that would be my suggestion. I don't know what you think, Joe.
Actually, the Four-State QRP group does that every year in Branson, Missouri. In fact, like I said, this weekend, this Friday would have been when we do the build-a-thon, where we have as many as 60 builders all at once building the same kit. So we take up several rooms to do it. And the neat thing is they have a lot of people like myself. Sometimes I will pre-build the kit that nobody else has seen. And I've figured out the bugs and some techniques that they may not have thought of that make it go easier for the builders. And so I can say, okay, this works a little better if you put this part in before you do this other one. And so you take that knowledge and it makes the group experience even better yet. And one of the kits that I like, it comes from a Chinese company, and I don't have the exact number of it, but it's a component tester. And sometimes it's sold as a transistor tester, but it's usually around $12 US. And what it does is it tells you if a device is a resistor or a capacitor or transistor or diode or inductor, and tells you all about it. And so when you're building kits, a lot of times you get those little tiny capacitors, especially the blue ones with white writing on them. They're just tiny. And no matter how good a magnifier you have and light, it usually glares when you're trying to read those little numbers. But if you take it and put it in one of these component testers, it tells you what value it is. So that particular kit sells for about $12. And so what you're going to look for is there's a site called Banggood, BANGGOOD.com. And there's also AliExpress and some other sites like that. And you can look on there and you can look for Transistor Tester Kit, and it'll say, oh, it also measures resistors, capacitors, inductors. And the beauty of that kit is it's got 3 connections coming out. And so I just take 3 different colored clip leads and I hook them to the output terminals. And it doesn't matter which lead goes to which. Now, on a lot of inexpensive multimeters, you're going to have a transistor test socket, but you got to put the emitter, collector, and base in certain holes and stuff like that, and the diodes in a certain way. Well, on these testers, you don't. If you put that diode between wires 1 and 3, it doesn't care. And when you turn it on and it tests it, it's going to say, oh, there's something connected between 1 and 3. It's a diode. The anode is this way, the cathode is that way, and this is the forward voltage drop. You know, and it'll tell you if it's a MOSFET and which lead is the drain gate source, DGS, or emitter base collector, if it's NPN, PNP, if it's a thyristor, or if it's an SCR. It's going to even identify what kind of part it is and tell you which lead is connected to which. Very, very smart device for $12.
A very, very useful device, as you say, and in the nicest possible way. I've had components that you're never 100% sure of the value, and especially when you get down even to 8-watt resistors. Those color bands on 8-watt resistors are so small. Sometimes it's worth just putting them into the tester, like you say, Joe, and running through them. So lots of good tips there. I assume because you told me you write for CQ magazine and that a lot of these tips will be in CQ magazine.
Yeah, I always refer to them every month when I talk about kits. Obviously, I'm not going to say the same thing every month, but I refer to them in each monthly article. I might be talking about what kind of solder to use or what I use to build a particular kit, that I used a particular tool or I used a particular technique, things like that. So over a period of time, you'll get all the same kind of information. And there's also a lot of my kit building talks all over YouTube and places like that as well.
That sounds good. Well, Joe, I'm going to wind it up at this point because otherwise you're going to give everything away and we won't have it sorted another time. But if somebody wanted to get hold of you or send you an email, what's the best way for them to contact you?
All right. I'm going to give you the easiest email to remember, and it's Joe, Joe, at K0NEB.com. So Joe at K0NEB.com, and that gets you me.
That certainly does. And you say you have a YouTube channel?
I don't have a YouTube. Well, I do have a YouTube channel that has my date and slideshows and so forth, but so many webcasts and podcasts and so on have YouTube channels that basically, if you just put in K0NEB on YouTube, it's going to pop up all sorts of different seminars that I've given.
That sounds good. That sounds great. Well, Joe, listen, thank you very much for giving us this interview tonight. Sorry I've had to cut it short in some ways because I think we could have chatted about this for the next 5 hours, but because of kit building is fun and I've certainly had a lot of fun building it, building all sorts of things, and you've given some very, very good solutions and ideas tonight. So I'd like to thank you for that, Joe.
All right, and thank you very much. And I appreciate being able to give a few more hints to hams all over the world from right here in Nebraska.
Yeah, 73.
73.
The ICQ Podcast. Getting it said for amateur radio.
Well, thanks a lot there, Dad, for your great feature there with Joe, Kilo 0, November Echo Bravo, about his kit building tips. And I'm sure anybody that enjoys a soldering iron will get something out of that feature. So thanks a lot, Joe, for joining us on this episode of the ICQ Podcast. Right, well, first bit of feedback that came in this episode, and it's coming from Malcolm, Foxtrot 4, Victor Romeo X-Ray. And Malcolm has come back to us in relation to a news story that we've been discussing recently. This is in relation to post-Brexit, UK hams going to France. Now, Malcolm had chatted to Chris and Martin on the DMR talk group and said he would come up with some information for us, and he has kindly done. So he tells us he spoke to the Assistant Director General, or the Secretary of the Assistant Director General, a lady called Christophe Dingy, and she explained that there's 2 tracks to using a radio legally in France, and because of Brexit, the UK, as no longer a member of the EU, but has a separate reciprocal agreement, now falls under those rules. So what does this basically mean? So it means if you're from a SEPT country and you visit France less than 3 months, there's no change. So for an amateur radio operator from a foreign country using his station during his stay in France less than 3 months, no formalities need to be completed, and you only need to prefix your UK call sign with a F for Foxtrot as usual. However, if you're staying for more than 3 months, there are 2 rules. Radio amateurs from an EU country must apply and will be assigned a call sign Foxtrot for Victor, and then there'll be, say, a couple of suffixes. And an radio amateur from a country that has signed a reciprocal agreement with France or a state-to-state agreement must apply and be assigned a call sign of Victor for Whiskey, and then 2 suffixes, and that's where the UK now is. If your stay extends for more than a year, you'll have to renew your call sign request. He also notes as well that for a permanent call sign change like his, the radio amateur or a foreign nationality will be assigned a call sign whether or not they are EU or not, but must provide proof of their residency in France, identification, and a copy of their license. Malcolm's kindly given us a link That essay is, even though it's in French under documentation, the application forms are in English and French, so we're going to pop that on the ICQ podcast webpage. And many thanks, Malcolm, for that local flavour there. So it was great to hear from Malcolm. I know you were working on the DMR talk group, Dad, and great for him to get involved and come back to that wonderful local information.
Yeah, it certainly was, Colin, and I've spent quite a bit of time talking to Malcolm. Not a problem at all. Malcolm said what he didn't tell us was the first time he contacted the Threnshire Authority, the person he contacted said, "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about this." So I think we were quite early on this one to get it to press, which is quite nice, and it's now been clarified. Malcolm is an interesting gentleman. He you probably won't mind me telling you, he's originally from Scotland. He lives in France, and he travels through France, Belgium, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. So he's out there a lot. You'll often catch him on the road late afternoon in the UK time, and a very interesting guy to chat to. So thank you very, very much for this, Malcolm. We do appreciate you doing this for us and finding out exactly what the rules are. So hopefully I'll have a lot more conversations with you going forward, Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks. So you can get in contact with us by going to the ICQ podcast webpage, icqpodcast.com, and click on the contact us section and drop us a line. But there's other ways of getting in touch as well. And Neil Toombs, Mike Zero, Charlie Juliet Mike got in contact via the YouTube channel. And Neil is a monthly subscriber to the show. We really do thank him for his very kind as a support of the show. And as I hope you continue to enjoy the show going forward. He wanted to bring up his feedback in relation to the EMF discussions. He said people keep mentioning about the hysteria online from people panicking over the new rules. But for some of us, this will be the end of the hobby after many years, and in his case, 20 years. He has a small garden, 40 feet by 30 feet, and currently runs an end-fed antenna in an inverted L configuration. And yes, he can stand right next to the vertical section, as could other members of my household, and is also around a metre away from two neighbouring gardens as it's tucked right in the back corner of the garden. I can't see I have any other options which will allow me the 3 metre space rule, which is being said to be the rough figure that comes out of the new calculations. So for many of us, some with many years of operating experience greater than himself, they sees the end of the hobby for them in sight. Maybe it's not a problem for those that have massive land and little restrictions, but for quite a few, and with many UK gardens being a postage stamp size, I see this as the end. Just think maybe we need to be considering those people in a position who have an antenna in the loft or wrapped around the top of a garden fence. Thanks for Neil M0, Charlie, Juliet, Mike. And Dad, this is obviously now going to be an ongoing problem, isn't it, with urban living and high density living, etc. Even looking out at my garden now as I record this with you now, my garden's massively shrunk since my move back into town. And so this is obviously going to cause more of an issue for, our hobby in the next coming months and weeks.
I think it may, Colin, and I'm going to say may. Neil, don't panic. There are a number of options here. Seriously, there are a number of options. First off, my garden is about the same size as yours, and although I'm not a big HF operator, I've got an offset dipole up for 40 metres and below from the house to the back garden fence, or the backyard fence, as our Americans would say, and that is in a sloper configuration, so a fair proportion of that is well above the ground, and that's one option. There's vertical antennas. You could probably get away with a vertical antenna, and also we do have a bit of an advantage at the moment, is that we are now at a stage where QRP might not be such a silly option. We're starting to get increased sunspot activity, which means we're now going into a nice new cycle. And with a lot of digital modes that everybody seems to be doing at the moment, I'm not so sure you need so much power. But please, I don't fully understand and I can't see your environment, but there are lots of things you could do in amateur radio. Don't just panic and throw the towel in straight away. Have a chat with your friends, have a chat with lots of people, see what's achievable, I think is what we do. And if certain things aren't achievable where you live, okay, maybe you can operate portable, maybe change what you do. There's so much in the hobby we could do, Neil. So what do you think, Colin?
Yeah, as you say, we evolve all the time, and what I appreciate, sometimes you can't do the thing you necessarily enjoy first. Hopefully there are other options available, as you say. Maybe the other thing as well is, I don't know if you remember the RSGB, but I know they have guys there that may be able to help you out as well in relation to some of these regulations, and maybe fully understanding or some of your options as well there. So again, another opportunity what your national association may be able to do for you as well. So definitely. But Neil, thanks a lot for the comment and also for your continued support of the ICQ podcast. It really is greatly appreciated. Now, talking about continued support, this show can only be advert free by the kind support of people like Neil, our monthly and subscription donors, and this episode donors, which are Dave Goodwin, Victor Echo 9 Charlie Bravo, and Sebastian Soika. Oscar Zulu 2, India Romeo Oscar. So thank you very much for your very kind support of the ICQ podcast. As I say, all the donations help us pay our way and hopefully allow us to develop the show and keep the show going for you. And as I say, pay for things like newsletters, etc., and the website that we provide you. All you need to do, if you'd like to help out, as we say, have a think about the value this show brings you. Put a monetary figure on it, and then visit icqpodcast.com/donate. Or as I say, whatever you send our way is greatly appreciated, and it goes towards running the show. So thanks a lot, guys, for your continued support. Now, Dad, the DMR group, Malcolm mentioned he was chatting to you guys on it there. Just remind everybody of the talk group number, as I say, where they can find you and the guys on the talk group.
Yeah, well, currently, ICQ Podcast has a live Brandmeister talk group. The talk group number is 9480. The 9 dictating that we are international, because our listeners are international. So, guys, you may catch an ICQ presenter at odd times. I'm certainly guilty of being on there, and Chris Howard and Martin Rothwell, Ed Durrant are fairly common to be around. Bill Barnes, I know has also been up on there, as well as Dan Romacek, and I know equally you have, Colin. So, don't just wait for an ICQ presenter. There are lots of nice people up there, Malcolm being one of them, as we've mentioned earlier. Phil Higginbottom in West Australia, VK6ADF. He's often around, but bearing in mind, it's the different time zones around the world. So just enjoy who you get hold of. And I've seen lots of call signs come up within the talk group that I haven't actually managed to get to talk to yet. I will at some point in time, but I think the thing is, don't just blip it, come and talk to us. And if you will find somebody, I'm sure you will. So that's what I'd say on that one, Colin.
No problem at all. Isn't it the old thing? Make a call. You never know who's going to be on the end of it. So, certainly say give a shout out and see who's there for you from there. Right, we'd like to thank Joe, Kilo 0, November Echo Bravo, for taking part in this episode's feature. And I hope you found this kit building tips of interest. I'd like to thank Chris, Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Ed Durrant, DD5, Lima Papa, and Bill Barnes, Whiskey Charlie 3, Bravo, for taking part in the News Roundtable with Dad, and much appreciated there for their time. As always, you can keep up to date with everything we do on the ICQ podcast by subscribing to our newsletter. So just go to icqpodcast.com and click on the subscribe button there, and you can keep up to date with everything going on there. And as I say, while you're there, check out that DMR group that Dad mentioned as well. All the news and information about that group is on that page as well, so you can find out more in relation to the news group from there. Right, well, I think that just about covers everything from our end now, Dad. As I say, and all we're left to do now is the very important job of making a cup of tea and hopefully find a chocky bicky for Mum as well.
Certainly will, Colin. No problems at all on that one. Well, it's about time Mrs. B and I had a cup of tea. And, I'll go and raid the biscuit tin for her and see what we can find. So, Yeah, as I say, another good episode in the can, and thoroughly enjoying. Getting very close to 350, aren't we? Oh, that's getting worrying. But hey, considering I only signed up for 10, Colin, that ain't bad, is it?
True. I'm just grateful you can't count. So no problems at all. Right, well, listen, guys, we're going to do this all again in a fortnight's time. In the meantime, 73's on. Continue to enjoy the hobby. 73's on.
Yeah, 73.